Baseball has always been a sport obsessed with tradition, a game where the dimensions of the field, the pace of play, and even the stitching on the ball are guarded like sacred relics. But every so often, a single moment forces the sport to look in the mirror and admit that something needs to change. Sometimes it's a tragedy. Sometimes it's gamesmanship taken too far. And sometimes it's the collision of old-school thinking with modern realities. The players who spark these changes rarely set out to rewrite the rule book. More often, they're just playing the game as they see it, yet their actions send ripples through the sport, shaping how future generations will play. And it's in those moments, in the friction between how the game was and how it must become, that baseball evolves. One of the most infamous examples of that evolution came in October 2015, when Chase Utley, the hard-nosed second baseman with a reputation for playing right on the edge, barreled into Mets shortstop Ruben Tejada in Game 2 of the NLCS. It wasn't the kind of slide you see in instructional videos. Utley never came close to touching the bag on his first pass. His trajectory aimed entirely at Tejada, not the base. The result? Tejada's leg snapped. His season, and effectively his major league career, ended on that play to Utley. This was old-school playoff baseball, breaking up the double play at all costs. To millions of viewers, it was a dirty, outdated tactic that had no place in the modern game. The outcry was immediate and loud from fans, from players, even from broadcasters who had cut their teeth in the tougher eras. And while Utley wasn't even called out on the play, the fallout led MLB to adopt what's now known as the Utley slide rule, a formal requirement that runners make a bona fide slide toward the base, able to reach it without veering toward the fielder. Violators now don't just get called out, they trigger an automatic double play. That one moment in 2015 became a line in the sand. The day MLB finally decided to prioritize the safety of middle infielders over the nostalgia of hard-nosed collisions. If Chase Utley's play ignited outrage over how runners approached second base, Buster Posey's moment did the same for home plate. May 25, 2011, AT&T Park in San Francisco. The defending World Series champion Giants were facing the Marlins. Posey, then just a year removed from winning Rookie of the Year and becoming the face of the franchise, crouched behind the plate ready for a throw home on a close play. Marlins outfielder Scott Cousins rounded third and made a choice not to slide, not to try to sneak a hand past Posey's tag, but to lower his shoulder and barrel through the catcher. The impact was jarring. Posey's legs folded awkwardly, his fibula fractured, ankle ligaments shredded. It was the kind of play that, in the so-called old days, was just part of the game, but watching one of baseball's brightest young stars crumple on the ground made it impossible to ignore the unnecessary violence of that tradition. Posey would miss the rest of the 2011 season, but he came back in 2012 to win MVP and lead the Giants to another title, a testament to his resilience. Still, the incident forced the league to confront a fundamental question: why was a position already punishing enough physically also a target for full speed, helmet-down collisions? The answer came in the form of the Buster Posey Rule, officially Rule 6.01i, which prohibited runners from veering into catchers without a legitimate path to the plate, and banned catchers from blocking the plate without possession of the ball. It wasn't about softening the game. It was about removing an unnecessary injury risk that didn't add to the skill or strategy of baseball. Posey's injury became the moment the league decided the days of football-style hits at home were over. Some rule changes come from strategic loopholes or controversial plays, but others are born from tragedy, the kind that shakes the sport to its core. On August 16, 1920, Cleveland Indians shortstop Ray Chapman stepped into the batter's box at the Polo Grounds to face New York Yankees pitcher Carl Mays. It was a typical dead ball era evening game, the kind where baseballs were used until they were scuffed, stained, and barely visible. Mays, known for his unorthodox submarine delivery, hurled a pitch that Chapman never even seemed to see. The ball struck him in the head with a sickening sound, so loud that some in the crowd thought it was the crack of the bat. Chapman collapsed at home plate and never regained consciousness. He died the next morning. the only player in MLB history to be killed by a pitch. The ball that hit him was grimy, discolored with tobacco stains and dirt, a standard of the time, but in hindsight, it was a deadly hazard in that era. Pitchers were even encouraged to scuff and discolor balls to give themselves an advantage. Chapman's death was the breaking point. In the days and years that followed, MLB began requiring umpires to replace dirty or damaged balls with fresh, clean ones throughout the game, a shift that not only improved visibility for hitters, but also ushered in the live ball era, where offensive numbers soared and the sport's power game began to take shape. The change didn't just make the game safer, it fundamentally altered how it was played, and all of it traces back to one pitch, one ball, and the sobering realization that no tradition is worth a life. Baseball loves its specialists, the lefty reliever brought in for one batter, the switch hitter who can neutralize any pitcher. But in 2008, the game got a rare glimpse of something even more unusual. A switch pitcher. Pat Venditte wasn't a gimmick. He was a genuine two-arm talent, capable of throwing with either hand depending on the matchup. Left-handed hitters would see his left arm, right-handed hitters his right. It was a chess match in real time, and for a while, it gave him a unique edge. But the beauty and absurdity of baseball is that when you give players an opening, they'll push it as far as it will go. One day, Venditte faced a switch hitter, and the matchup devolved into pure comedy. Venditte switched his glove to the other hand. The batter switched to the opposite side of the plate. Venditte switched back. The batter switched again. The crowd roared with laughter. The umpires looked on helplessly, and neither side seemed ready to commit. It was a standoff with no end in sight, the baseball equivalent of a duel where both opponents just keep circling. That spectacle forced MLB to step in and create the Venditte Rule, requiring pitchers to declare which hand they would use before each at-bat and stick with it until the batter's plate appearance ended. It was a practical fix, but it also underscored a timeless truth. Baseball's charm lies in its quirks, but sometimes those quirks need boundaries, if only to keep the game moving. Venditte's career may not have been long, but he'll forever be the reason pitchers can't endlessly dance their way around a matchup. Every so often, a player comes along who doesn't just bend the rules. He reveals that the rules were never written with someone like him in mind. Shohei Ohtani is that player. Before he arrived in the majors, baseball had been living in a world of specialization. Pitchers pitched, hitters hit, and the idea of a true two-way player belonged to dusty stories about Babe Ruth. When Ohtani joined the Los Angeles Angels in 2018, he wasn't just dabbling in both roles. He was excelling. He could strike out 10 batters on a Sunday and then crush a 450-foot home run on Monday. But there was a problem. The rulebook wasn't built for someone who could do both. Under the existing DH rules, the moment Ohtani left the mound as a pitcher, the Angels would lose their designated hitter spot, forcing pitchers to hit or burning through pinch hitters. It was an unnecessary penalty for a player whose only crime was being historically talented. For a few years, the Angels worked around it with roster gymnastics, but the inefficiency was obvious. Finally, in 2022, MLB introduced what's now known as the Ohtani Rule, allowing a starting pitcher to remain in the lineup as the designated hitter, even after leaving the mound. It wasn't just a rule change, it was an acknowledgement that baseball had entered a new era, one where a single player could legitimately dominate both sides of the game. Ohtani's impact goes beyond stats or highlight reels. He forced the league to imagine a different kind of superstar and rewrite the rules to make space for him. Baseball has always had its gray areas, the little tricks, the gamesmanship that toes the line between clever and illegal. Few players lived in that space more comfortably than Gaylord Perry, a Hall of Fame pitcher with 314 career wins. Perry wasn't just known for his durability or his Cy Young awards. He was infamous for throwing pitches that seemed to defy the laws of physics. He'd grin, lick his fingers, touch his cap, wipe his hand on his jersey, and somehow the baseball would dart or dip in ways that left hitters muttering under their breath. Everyone suspected what was happening. Perry himself even admitted to doctoring balls in his autobiography, Me and the Spitter, Vaseline, pine tar, saliva. He joked about it, bragged about it, and made it part of his personal mythology. And here's the thing, during most of his career, enforcement of the rules against foreign substances was practically non-existent. Umpires rarely checked pitchers, and Perry was only ejected once for it in over 2 decades. But his antics and the public nature of his confessions made MLB look like it wasn't taking its own rules seriously. That embarrassment, combined with growing pressure to maintain a level playing field, led the league to strengthen Rule 6.02, banning foreign substances more explicitly and giving umpires the power to inspect both balls and pitchers on the spot. Perry didn't just test the limits, he exposed how little the limits were being enforced. In many ways, the modern sticky stuff crackdowns trace their lineage right back to him, the master of bending a baseball and the rulebook to his will. Some players changed the game with their skill, others with their presence. Barry Bonds did both to such an extreme that teams literally stopped playing baseball when he stepped to the plate. Bonds, MLB's all-time home run king, was so feared in his prime that opposing managers began treating him like a walking hazard sign. The numbers still look absurd: 688 career intentional walks, including a mind-bending 120 into 1,000 for a lone. That season, there were times when the Giants' offense essentially started at first base because teams refused to let him swing. In some cases, managers went to such extremes they intentionally walked him with the bases loaded, conceding a run rather than risk a grand slam. To some, it was the ultimate sign of respect. To others, it was a sign the sport had a problem. Games slowed to a crawl. Fans groaned as the most exciting hitter in a generation trotted to first without taking a swing, and the rhythm of competition broke down. After Bonds retired, MLB sought to address the pace and flow issues by changing the mechanics of the intentional walk. Beginning in 2017, managers could simply signal to the umpire for an intentional walk. No more lobbying for meaningless pitches outside the zone. While Bonds wasn't the only factor in the decision, his unprecedented frequency of intentional passes put the issue under a national spotlight. It's ironic. A player whose swing could send a ball into the bay also left a legacy on how the game handles the moments when no one dares let him swing at all. Baseball has always had its share of deliberate, methodical players, but Mike Hargrove took that to an art form, or, depending on your patience, a test of endurance. Nicknamed the human rain delay, Hargrove wasn't stalling out of malice. It was just his ritual. After every pitch, he'd step out of the batter's box and go through an elaborate sequence, adjust his batting gloves, tug on his jersey sleeves, tap his helmet, wipe his hands on his pants. Sometimes he'd repeat the whole process twice before stepping back in. It was part muscle memory, part mental reset, and for Hargrove, it worked. He was an all-star first baseman with a career .290 average and over 1,600 hits. But for everyone else, pitchers, umpires, and fans, it was maddening. Games already had a leisurely pace, and Hargrove's routine turned every plate appearance into a drawn-out mini-drama. As baseball entered an era where the pace of play became a growing concern, Hargrove's legacy became a cautionary tale. Eventually, MLB implemented a rule requiring batters to keep 1 foot in the batter's box between pitches, with certain exceptions to prevent these marathon at-bats. While the rule didn't erase batter routines entirely, it curbed the excesses that could drag games to a crawl. Hargrove never set out to slow the game, but his meticulous habits became a living example of how one player's quirks can push the league to draw a line. When people hear the name Jose Canseco, they often think of towering home runs, his role in ushering in baseball's steroid era, or his controversial tell-all book. But one of his most unforgettable, and frankly bizarre, contributions to MLB history had nothing to do with performance enhancers and everything to do with physics, bad luck, and a little bit of slapstick comedy. On May 26, 1993, while playing right field for the Texas Rangers, Canseco tracked a routine fly ball toward the warning track. It looked like a straightforward play until it wasn't. The ball bounced off the top of his head and sailed over the outfield wall for a home run. In real time, it was almost hard to believe. A professional outfielder turning into an accidental prop in one of the strangest home runs in MLB history. Fans laughed, opponents laughed, and even Canseco cracked a grin afterward. But the incident also left some wondering, how exactly should that be scored? The rules clarified that as long as the ball never touched the ground before clearing the fence, any deflection off a fielder, yes, even off his head, counted as a home run. It wasn't a rule change, but it was a high-profile moment that reinforced and publicized an obscure scoring nuance. Canseco's head-assisted homer became a staple of blooper reels, a reminder that even the most physically gifted players can have a moment that turns them into unwilling comedians. Doc Ellis was already a colorful figure in baseball lore, an outspoken, talented pitcher for the Pittsburgh Pirates during the 1970s, a time when the team was a perennial contender. But his most infamous story, one he told openly later in life, had little to do with conventional baseball achievement. Ellis claimed that on June 12, 1970, he threw a no-hitter against the San Diego Padres while under the influence of LSD. Whether every detail was true or not, Ellis never shied away from the fact that drug use was part of his playing days. In an era before Major League Baseball had comprehensive drug testing, his admission was both shocking and oddly emblematic of a sport that was turning a blind eye to a growing issue. At the time, MLB had no formal structure to address substance abuse, recreational or performance-enhancing, and Ellis's candor, combined with other high-profile cases in the years that followed, added public pressure for the league to take action. His story became part of a broader cultural shift, a recognition that professional athletes weren't immune to the social and drug-related challenges of the times. By the 1980s and beyond, MLB implemented more structured drug testing policies, covering both illicit substances and, later, performance-enhancing drugs. Doc Ellis's LSD no-hitter remains one of baseball's strangest legends, but its lasting impact is how it highlighted the urgent need for the sport to take substance abuse seriously. Some rule changes in baseball come from intense playoff drama or legendary feats, and others come from moments so absurd you'd think they were scripted for a comedy sketch. Michael Morse's infamous grand slam that wasn't, and then was, belongs firmly in the latter category. On September 29, 2012, Morse, playing for the Washington Nationals, connected on a pitch against the St. Louis Cardinals and sent it sailing over the wall. For what looked like a grand slam, the crowd erupted, but the umpires didn't. They initially ruled the hit a single due to a misinterpretation of the play, sending runners only one base forward. After a replay review, the call was overturned. It was indeed a home run, but here's where things got surreal. By rule, Morse and the base runners had to replay the scoring by returning to their original positions and running the bases again in proper order. So Morse walked back to home plate, took a phantom swing without a pitcher, and jogged around the bases as if the whole moment had been rewound and played back. The entire stadium laughed, the clip went viral, and MLB quickly realized this was not the kind of procedural theater anyone needed to see again. Replay rules were later clarified to allow umpires to award bases appropriately after an overturned call without forcing players into awkward, staged reenactments. Morse's replay jog remains one of the strangest viral highlights in modern baseball, a testament to how even a correct call can look ridiculous without the right framework. Baseball is a sport that thrives on rhythm, the slow build of the pitcher's windup, the batter's timing as he tracks the ball. But Johnny Cueto, with his signature flair and unpredictable tempo, was a one-man disruption to that rhythm. Known for his shimmying delivery and occasional hesitation moves, Cueto sometimes took things a step further, delivering pitches so quickly after receiving the ball that batters barely had time to get set in the box. It was part gamesmanship, part psychological warfare, forcing hitters to play on his clock rather than the game's. While quick pitching had always been technically illegal if the batter wasn't ready, Enforcement was inconsistent, and pitchers occasionally used it as a weapon. Cueto's style brought the issue into sharper focus, especially when hitters complained these surprise deliveries weren't just unfair, but potentially dangerous. A batter unprepared for a 95 mph fastball has far less time to react, increasing the risk of injury. MLB responded by emphasizing enforcement of the quick pitch rule. If a batter isn't reasonably set, the pitch is ruled an automatic ball, or a balk if runners are on base. Cueto didn't lose his flair. His wind-up variations still keep hitters guessing, but the days of sneaking in a lightning-fast pitch before a hitter blinks are now firmly in the past. Sometimes, a rule change isn't about protecting players or clarifying a technicality. It's about stopping a loophole from being exploited in the middle of a game. Sam Fuld, the speedy and savvy outfielder best known for his all-out defensive plays, once found himself at the center of a small but oddly important fix to baseball's substitution rules. In 2014, while playing for the Minnesota Twins, Fuld was brought in to pinch run, but then was made to stand on the mound, pretending to warm up as a pitcher, not because he was actually going to pitch, but because it bought extra time. For the bullpen to get a real pitcher ready, it was a pure stalling tactic, legal at the time, but clearly against the spirit of the game. The opposing team protested, and while the move technically followed the letter of the rulebook, MLB agreed. It made for bad optics and worse pacing. Soon after, the league amended Rule 3.05 to require that any player announced as a pitcher must actually face at least one batter before being replaced, effectively closing the loophole. Fuld wasn't trying to rewrite baseball's substitution laws. He was just following his manager's orders, but in doing so, he became the face of one of the more obscure but necessary modern rule adjustments. Few rulebook moments in baseball history are as dramatic or as replayed as the pine tar incident. On July 24, 1983, the Kansas City Royals were trailing the New York Yankees at Yankee Stadium when George Brett, already one of the game's most feared hitters, stepped to the plate in the ninth inning. With one swing, he sent a go-ahead to run homer into the right field seats. The Royals erupted, but Yankees manager Billy Martin wasn't ready to concede. Martin pointed out that Brett's bat appeared to have pine tar, a sticky substance used for grip, extending well beyond the 18-inch limit from the handle allowed under Rule 1.10c. The umpires measured, agreed it was excessive, and nullified the home run, calling Brett out to end the game. That's when Brett exploded from the dugout in one of the most iconic on-field meltdowns ever caught on camera, charging toward home plate with pure fury in his eyes. The Royals protested, and American League President Lee MacPhail later overturned the call, reinstating the homer and resuming the game weeks later from the exact point of controversy. The fallout from that bizarre sequence led MLB to amend the rule. Going forward, excess pine tar would no longer nullify a hit. Instead, the bat would simply be removed from the game. Brett's rage didn't just give baseball one of its most famous highlight clips. It also ensured no future player would lose a home run over a few extra inches of sticky grip. Baseball in the early 1900s was still figuring out its own personality, part competitive sport, part vaudeville act, and few players embody the chaotic blend better than Germany's Schaefer, a utility infielder with a flair for the absurd. Schaefer was as well known for his antics as for his hitting. His most famous stunt came during a game in 1911 while playing for the Washington Senators. Standing on first base with a teammate on third, Schaefer stole second base without a throw. But then, in a move that baffled both teams, he took off back toward first, successfully stealing the base in reverse. The idea was to draw a throw and create a rundown that would allow the runner from third to score. While it didn't work, the crowd loved it, and it instantly became one of those quirky baseball moments that everyone told stories about. The problem? It also made umpires realize that if reverse steals became a common tactic, the game could descend into chaos. In 1920, MLB formally closed the loophole by banning deliberate retreats to a previous base once used. legally advanced, unless it was part of a legitimate rundown. Schaefer's reverse steal may not have changed the scoreboard that day, but it did change the rule book, sealing his place as one of the sport's great tricksters whose comedy had permanent consequences.